Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Booker, literary aviatrix, and I'm excited to talk with the author of the Aviatrix Book Club discussion book for June 2025, The Improvisers. Fewer than 10% of pilots and aircraft mechanics are women. These are their stories of tenacity, adventure, and courage. Stories with the power to inspire, heal, and connect. Welcome to the literary aviatrix community, where we leverage the power of story to build and celebrate our community and inspire the next generation of aviation. Nicole Glover, welcome.
It's great to be here. Excited to chat my book and everything else involved with it.
Yeah, me too. So this book is super fun. It's a little bit of a departure from our typical genres, which is super exciting. But for anybody who hasn't had a chance to read it, can you give us a summary of the book?
All right, Improvisers is a standalone murder mystery with a heady dose of fantasy. It stars a pilot, Velma Fry, who's a magical investigator, and a big chunk of the book has her traveling across the U.S. On the trail of magical artifacts are causing havoc. It's the 1930s, so it's the peak of the golden age of the flight. I get to also explore other areas of Prohibition, Harlem Renaissance, and other fun tidbits of the genre in the decade.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so exciting and so fascinating the way you wove that together. And from what you called it a standalone, but from what I understand, there are several other books featuring the Rhodes family throughout the decades. Can you kind of tell us how this book ties into that list of books?
Yes, The Improvisers follows my two previous books, The Conductors and The Undertakers, which follow her grandparents in the 1870s. Those books were set in Philadelphia, and they're basically on former underground railroad conductors. They decide they're going to use their talents and magic to solve murder mysteries. And so The Improvisers kind of continues that legacy and also takes it the fun spin of exploring what does this world look like in the 1930s.
Oh, that's so cool. So creative. So tell me, how did you come to writing and what brought you to writing, fantasy and speculative fiction?
I guess writing kind of comes out of my love of reading. I've been a big bookworm all my life, so I've been reading forever, and I guess wanting to tell my own stories kind of came out of that. I've been writing as long as I could remember, basically from little stories. I got really lucky that my dad gave me his old computer when I was fairly young, so I got to type out my little stories. And there were like one chapter pages of each for the book. It was fun. My first stories were mysteries, and over the years, I kind of exploring what kind of stories I wanted to write and tell about. I fell in love with the fantasy genre, like around middle school age. All my favorite books were tend to be involved in that genre. And as I started thinking, exploring different ideas and topics, is writing about mysteries, writing about fantasy came naturally. I grew up in Virginia, so of course, if you live in Virginia, there's history everywhere. Like there's so much, all those historical places to go to, and I've always been fascinated by what does the past have to tell us? How does it reflect on these things? And mixing things with genre like the fantasy and mystery allows me to explore the history in a way that I couldn't really do in just straight up historical fiction. I get to explore different aspects and also kind of combine and contrast the other elements of genre with it.
Yeah, it's really cool. So, that one of the things I will say is that fantasy is typically not my genre, but in the same
Yes.
way that reading that women in aviation being like the focus of the book, draws me into
Mhm.
our history in ways that I wouldn't connect with it otherwise. You helped bring me in with this fabulous character, Velma Fry, and I was hooked. Like once I got to know her a little bit, I was like, okay, I'm totally into this. It's so fun and so creative. So tell me, like what inspired this character, Velma, first of all?
Yeah, I have to give my props to Bessie Coleman. I kind of stumbled across her in school. It was one of the first kind of non-civil rights adjacent kind of historical figure I learned about. 'Cause I know I learned about Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, as well as the civil rights leaders and activists. But Bessie Coleman was kind of the first kind of historical person I met outside of these like typical time periods. It was fascinating to me learning more about her history. And also that there were other aviators that were inspired by her. I think Bessie Coleman was basically the first Black woman to do a lot of these aviation stuff, but it literally inspired her contemporaries and people who came afterwards. And learn about all the other women who followed in her footsteps, whether it's Willa Brown or Janet Harmon Bragg. It was fascinating to kind of explore this side of the character. I think my initial first pass of this book was actually set in the 1940s. I think I was, really interested to see airmen and the wasp. And I think the initial pitch I had with the story was that she got rejected by both of these groups because the
Mhm.
Seeking Airmen didn't take women and the wasps didn't take any non-white women. And but I realized as I was tinkering around with the story that maybe I wanted something more dynamic. I wanted her to be more in control. I didn't want her to be rejected. In the 1930s, ironically, I added a little bit more of that because I think moving the different decades allowed me to kind of explore the whole of like the flight shows, the air shows, and other dynamics of that decade.
Well, it's super fun the way it ties in, especially
Mhm,
this year. I mean, we read about Bessie Coleman
mhm,
in a fictional novel called A Pair of Wings by Carol Hobson.
yes.
And so we did that a couple years ago. It's a fabulous book about
Mhm,
Bessie. I love the way, since it's fictionalized, we kind of get a richer story out of it than we
mhm,
might in a
yes.
biography. But then this year, we had the pleasure of reading this awesome biography really targeting for young adults
Mhm,
to educate them on the history of blacks in Chicago, American Wings by Elizabeth Wein and Shariel Smith.
yes.
And then we had the amazing experience of seeing Janet Harmon Bragg and Willa
Mhm,
Brown be inducted into the Women in Aviation International Hall of Fame. So that just happened
yes.
this year. So it's been a
Oh,
great year celebrating this history. So,
definitely.
and you've done such a skillful job of kind of, you don't, I think you mentioned Bessie specifically,
Mhm,
but there are other characters in the book
mhm,
who are sort of tangential, like you use a name, like there's a Cornelius in there,
mhm,
and some others. So tell me about like how you dug into this history, the research for
mhm,
it, and why you made the decisions that you did, and kind of how you played with
mhm.
that.
Yeah, a lot of once I decided I'm going to go hard in on the Aviator, I started researching what is this the scene look like, and it's actually like I split in Chicago, which of course was one of the major hubs for the Black pilots in that group. So I looked at what does it look like, how much I want to share with readers, how important it is, and from my research, I was getting a good sense of the terminology, what to expect, what they were doing. I made like I made some of the flight shows more like active in this time period because I wanted to do certain aspects of my story. But my research wise, it just made me getting the ground floor of things because that's why I feel like that's important to me as a writer, knowing what's the basics out there so I can tweak and change and most importantly share to readers. And so I
Yeah.
decided like there's that's a rule for me as a writer. I don't always kind of insert like straight up historical figures into the book, unless they're like big names. But for smaller
Mhm.
characters, I might make more illusion. So a lot of the secondary characters or have a direct illusion, as you mentioned, as you mentioned, Cornelius Jeffries is inspired by Cornelius Coffrey,
Mhm.
and I'd want to have a more fictionalized version of his character because I like the dynamic that the real life figure played as being a major backer of building a flight school, building it, being a big supporter of the other aviators out there. But I wanted to have to bring a character that can do some more fun things with me within the story. And I like to make these nods. It's fun for me as a writer to make nods to the historical characters. It's nods kind of winking at the people who know their history, who know these names, might recognize, and maybe inspire people. Maybe they see like, oh, I mentioned this person. Maybe they might start to see that someone exists, and they'll come across the research that way.
Yeah.
And as performing the research, I think I guess one of my key starting points was a few books of Black Wings. I think this was something I put up a few years ago.
Yep.
I found the autobiography of Janet Harmon Bragg that she wrote, which was really good. They gave me some really fun in like first person point of view insights. And just for just sporadic things throughout, and as you always find the internet, they led me to different rabbit holes, whether it was different podcasts, different articles that dug deep into these things, and trying to find as many like kind of really close personal narratives that kind of led to different inspirations and led me to like build upon these different aspects I found.
Yeah, so for anybody who wants more of that, I will
Mm,
say I know American Wings came out after probably
mm,
you were writing and getting
yes.
this book published, and it is a great resource. So
Mm,
if you want to know the real story of what was going on during this time frame and a little bit later as well, you go and read American Wings. So that's amazing, and
yes.
there's so many fun things about this book. I love the design of the book. Each chapter has like a little constellation at the time. I
Yes.
know you call them star sigils.
Mm,
There's all this magical world building that you
mm,
do, and Velma has some interesting powers. And this, so tell me about. I was picking up on hints of sort of
mm,
race relation
mm,
stuff and civil rights stuff, but
mm,
packaged in the form of magical rights and the
Yes.
prohibition on magical rights. So can you tell me kind of how you wove those things in?
Yeah, I think for me, having in civil rights and race relation is always like a facet, a feature of the world, not the main plot. And I like to do the metaphors, it's particularly with magic. Magic rights becomes a big metaphor that I use to kind of explore
Mhm.
these aspects of things. And I kind of just pick and choose what I wanted to really highlight. So I think some we talk whether I'm talking about different like magical laws that have been impacted by different groups. That's a way for me to talk about it without, I guess, getting deep into the weeds. Certain things. I also wanted to foreground some of the civil rights activism that happened in that time period. We tend to think, oh, civil rights happened in the 1950s, 1960s, but they've been going on for way much longer than that. So
Right.
wanted to hint at certain groups that are going on throughout there. And let's see what
Can
else.
you can you
Yeah.
give us a little, because
Hmm.
so I can follow
Yes.
the leads on the
Okay.
aviation stuff. So
Yes.
can you give us
Hmm.
some parallels between your illusions in the real civil rights movement?
The 1930s had a lot of things happening. You have posts. We're about a decade out from all the stuff that happened in World War I, the Red Summer, and all these things are still inflicting. We're seeing more rising lynchings. We're seeing all these things happening in the backdrop of
Right.
things, especially with the onset of the Great Depression starting to ramp up.
Yeah.
And I took some slivers of these aspects to kind of not just to basically kind of form this is what she expects, because Velma flies across the U.S. a lot, so you I made really point she's be able to make these pit stops, see friends, and she had known locations, but there's also places where she may have landed somewhere unexpectedly and might have a point of like fear. My One of my favorite scenes to write was to kind of say without too many words that might be a particular perilous situation for her, but not like be really bold about this is disaster. I wanted the readers to kind of get the implications of what's going to occur. And there's also I also mentioned with one of the co-leads of the story, Dylan Harris has backstory where he was a victim of a kind of a race riot incident was similar to Rosewood or Tulsa in that time period, and that informed a lot of his backstory, and
Mhm.
which I deliberately placed around these scenes of potential peril that he encounters, because even though I wanted to show that these characters can be able to fly and flip across the country from planes, there's still some concerns they might have that's not always easy, because still this is the early days of aviation. Yeah, there's a few airports and places, but they're not always welcoming, and don't always know unless you have familiar lay of the grounds. So there's all
Yeah.
the things I kind of just weave in the backdrop of the stories that as an aspect that I wanted to emphasize.
No, it's very
Mhm,
craftful, but you still kind of get the
mhm,
underlying tone of it
mhm,
for sure, and obviously still relevant, unfortunately.
mhm,
So this setting of Bramble Crescent,
mhm.
which is almost is a character in
Yes.
itself. Is this location, is it inspired by something in particular?
Mhm,
Is there history in, because you mentioned like all these beautiful places in
yes.
Massachusetts, and then
Mhm,
also you mentioned like at the opening of the book in Maryland when you're kind of setting up this
yes.
place as a character, is that alluding to anything specific in history? And I'm curious to
Mhm.
know, does this location show up in your other books?
Yeah, Bramble Crescent was a really fun invention of mine. It's inspired mostly by Martha Vineyards. It had
Mhm.
the Oak Bluffs, particularly, as well as the other like kind of black resort towns on the beach in different areas. It's kind of unique, and also with a bit of the Sea Islands and the South Carolina, Georgia
Mhm.
area. And those, I like the idea of having like a town where that just is black owned. It was black, majority black, and they could allow for a unique kind of styles of magic. You got to see the kind of contrast of like, whereas on the state side it's more restricted because of different rules, but on the Bramble Crescent it's more free flowing. There's more magic going on. You can see how Velma changes a little bit as she goes between places. And I really like that idea. Explore, it was a really fun setting for me to explore the different aspects of what was going on.
Okay, so
Uh,
you talked about like these other themes. So we have
uh,
our aviation history, we have some Black and civil rights history,
yes.
these little pockets
Mhm.
of Black communities up and down the coast,
Yes.
and then what other themes that maybe I would have
Mhm.
missed that were important to you that you included in this book?
Mhm. Okay, so one fun thing I had in there was use of music. It's For some
Right.
reason music is a big thing. You have improvisers, of course, and Rama herself is a jazz musician, which is comes up a hot relevant point a few times throughout the book. And
Correct. Yeah.
one fun thing was I have a little song that's weaved through here,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
mostly because it's a result of different musical history. from the clapping games that children play. I grew up with a few of them. I think the little rhyme that appears throughout the book as part of a big mystery clue. I was
Yeah,
kind of took inspiration from the songs I remembered and whatnot. I some that try to get some that beats of the memory. But I also put it in there because I did when I was doing some research. I found like a lot of these clapping games became songs. So I think I remember stumbling across an old song that kind of transposed like an old clapping game into like a fun R&B song. I'm like, oh, that's a fun thing, especially as I did history into early jazz music, because I
absolutely.
have one of the plot elements is a defunct music production company that has some relevance throughout the plot, and a lot this that was directly inspired by the Black Swan record company that had lived basically active for a very few short years in the early 1920s. It was black owned. It had records. It did some records, did really well, but then suddenly it just stopped making money, went away, and vanished. It even put out like famous people like Elsa Walters and whatnot, but no one really knows about it. And I only found about it by chance. I was diving deep into the history. And so that was a big theme. I always, cause even though I'm not musical myself, uh, it continues to be inspiring. I think because there's so much elements of music and magic working together, the ability to transpose and transform, which is
Yeah,
it was always kind of fun the element to include. And I think another smaller theme was I guess family and legacy.
right.
Her older sister plays a kind of a major minor role in throughout the book as a supporting player, but also as a way to kind of compare and contrast to what Velma wants in her life. I think they grew up on a small island together. The older sister is the one that ends up running the family ends that Velma's also in line to inherit. But she chose, well, her sister chose to stay. Velma chose to explore, mainly because of all the resulting things that happened at her coming of age, because she was coming of age around the 1920s after influenza, after the war, after the race riots at times. So she wants to explore and do things out in the world and travel and not really always come back. And that was the point, a minor point of contention. But it was also a fun way to show the character dynamics of what she wants and compare the sister relationships. I think all my books tend to have sister relationships in there because I have sisters. So
Aha.
I think as a big theme that's I guess somehow always weaves into my stories because I want the different dynamics of what sister relationships look like, and they're always not always good. I mean, they're always great sides, there's bad sides, and there's sometimes they have little fights that can bloom up to things to talk about other to compare and contrast the things they want out of life.
Yeah, and that's very craftily done. And,
Mm,
and now that you mentioned the music bit too,
mm,
I kind of recognize an allusion to also the black film industry at the time.
mm,
Like there were people who were trying to make authentic black films
yes.
at the time as well. So you have some of that in
Mm,
there. And then our her sister is she is in a wheelchair. What inspired
yes.
that choice?
I think it's one of those that kind of came together. I think I wanted I, I I don't know what particularly struck out to me. I think because I was thinking of the things the time period. I had made a reference to her having polio. I think it kind of came together because I wanted to have include other people that are just differently labeled in there, but also show that just because she's in the wheelchair, she's can't do anything, can't be pretty much a badass throughout the book. I think I have a line in there saying that their sister, she's always a fighter for everything, and that she's doesn't she always fights because that's what life's about basically, and that was a good character moment. And I wanted to I just there was another element that I wanted to add in there, and also just it makes an interesting facets of how you can compare and contrast. And you can easily say, oh, because she's in the wheelchair, because it compares against the mobility with her sister and whatnot. But it
Yeah, and
just,
it's an interesting like
mm,
it gives her some limitations,
mm,
some handicaps in the way that we would say a handicap
mm,
in a game, where she's
mm,
magical, but she's limited by
yes.
her ability to maneuver. So
Mm.
that was interesting. That was
Yeah, and
an
also got to
interesting
show
aspect.
off, I guess, magical like at accommodations because even
Right.
though she's in a wheelchair, there's aspects of things I kind of subtly place around the house. Yeah, there's elevators, there's lifts, there's also ways her magic allows her chair to transform and do things.
Yeah.
I like the idea of having like roses embedded on the wheelchair because that's the reason why it's a wooden wheelchair so she can do magic with that. So
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
this thing, just thinking is I'm always about big and thinking of ways to expand how we view that fantasy, especially when we have magical elements to the story.
Yeah, no, that was really cool. And so what do you hope that this book specifically, and then sort of
Mm,
this collection of books
yes.
featuring this family, what do you hope that
Mm,
does, or what
mm.
do you hope readers take away from it?
I think for me, writing these stories is about allowing us to see history in the way that we tend to not view it. We tend to view history, especially Black history, as very serious. It's about these particular topics, and you have to be. There's only one way to do this, and you have to be. It's very important, and we don't allow ourselves to kind of explore the other facets of the time period and explore things as well, and just even play around with stuff. Yeah, there are a lot of terrible things that we want to highlight and very important things we want to share. But there's also elements that it's fun to explore, because a lot of things when it comes to history, historical fiction, is that we are using it as a lens to kind of view our viewpoint in the world and talk about things. And I think beyond that, I think this for me is just kind of taking the fun of this, meshing what happens when you add mystery, what happens when you add magic to these stories. A lot of these stories are all historical topics that interest me, but also other aspects of the genre I love mixing together and see what happens. It was very fun for me to build out the world of Improvisers, seeing what does magic look like in a slowly growing modern world, and how do I make magic work when we have airplanes now and new technology, because they often say like 1920s is the first modern decade, so we start seeing things more familiar, and meshing it with magic is always interesting to me. Like how does that look and how does that work? And yeah, that's from it for me from the writing side, as always.
One of the things I saw on your
Uh,
website is that there was an announcement from a couple of years ago
mm,
that Queen Latifah's media group
yeah.
was going to develop
Mm,
one of your books, The Conductors,
yes.
into a movie. Is that still moving along, or what's happening?
I haven't heard much. I think the writer's strike may have done some things, but
Of
it's very
course, yeah.
exciting. Lots of books get optioned all the time, so it's very exciting to get optioned by her, and by her and Jim Henson Company. Two big names I recognize right away. So it's
Yeah,
still like very exciting to me, and hopefully one day we'll see something out of it, because
yeah,
it's always fun to have these conversations, think about how you adapt stories,
yeah,
because I always have, I have one version in my mind about what it looks like, but seeing other people's interpretations, seeing how it could change for the better, for worse, whether
yeah.
it's in a TV series, movie series, it's always fun to me, and to have these interactions. I hope we'll have future conversations in the future about it.
Yeah, well, I hope so too. I'm
Mhm.
excited for that, and hopefully,
Mhm.
if they love that one, then we'll get to the improvisers as well, because I would
Yes.
love to see that on screen.
Mhm.
Also, it would be amazing for young people to be able to
Yes.
see Velma in this
Mhm.
context and learn these little bits of history just through osmosis from
Yeah.
learning the story. It
A
would
lot of
be
the movies,
amazing.
and especially a lot of films, short film gets you really interested in things, because
Yeah,
it's very approachable, and you can do a lot of fun things, and especially visual things. It's always fun to watch movie about planes, to see the
yeah.
dynamics of things, and it's always exciting. That's some of the best films I think involve planes.
Yeah. And one of the things that when I was graduating for my Master of Fine
Mhm.
Arts in Writing, I entreated all of my classmates to please include a female character, no matter what, a female
Yes.
character in aviation, whether she was a
Yes.
pilot or mechanic, somewhere in their novels, no matter what
Mhm.
genre they were writing, or
Mhm.
what, how fantastical it was, just include one. So you've done that. You're my
Yes.
new hero
Yay.
for doing that, and making
Mhm.
her the main character and sort of making it a central focus of the book.
Mhm.
It makes it so fun for me. And it gives different readers a new lens into aviation,
Mhm.
which is really fun, and hopefully piques their interest, not just in the history, but
Yes.
potentially in actually following in those footsteps at some point. That would be amazing.
Oh yeah, I think learning about like just flying in pilots actually made me more interested, because trying to be a pilot, because I my parents live across a small kind of teaching airport. We always had little planes flying across, and there was never too much interested over there. I was living there, but now a little bit more interested now. I guess I don't know, because I always enjoyed flight. That's why things of flight, flying, birds appear in all my stories. So I guess I never really considered myself to learning about just being a pilot until I started writing this book, ironically enough.
Oh, well, girl, you need to go out and get a discovery flight right away
Yes.
and report
Mhm.
back.
Okay. I will do that.
I absolutely love this. I love when I
Mhm.
talk to authors who, they found their way into aviation through a writing interest, and
Mhm.
they're like, maybe I'll give it a try. I hope you
Yes.
do. I really do.
Mhm.
So, what are you working on now? What's next for you?
I'm about to turn in my next book, The Star Seekers.
I
It's
saw that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it takes with another follows another relative of the family to 1960s. And I'm
Oh,
doing a magical NASA version, because she in this book the main character is a magical engineer at a version of NASA. And so it's kind of exploring that side of the going to space. I'm going, I was first in plan, now I'm going to space. And there's lots of fun things with this book, as well as, some adventure elements. Cause there's I've been pitching it as Hidden Figures meet Indiana Jones.
Oh,
But there's
cool.
lots of adventure side of things.
Oh, that's so cool.
Mhm.
Well, Nicole, is there anything else you wanted to say about this book before we transition to talking a little bit more about writing and publishing?
For me, the kind of the best part of Improvisers was kind of just taking different aspects of the time period. That there was also like a fun romantic subplot with the love interest, who was a newspaper reporter at the time period. I think there is some history that she had Velma had before the book had been she'd been writing a flight column for the newspaper that he worked at as well. And that's the first time they first came clashing together. As always, they have nice, fun rivals to lovers kind of dynamic of things, which is always fun to write some bantering aspects of any kind of story, because it's just fun to see how people they argue and they slowly get together. They get along throughout the story because they team up throughout the book to solve the mystery. And I got to use the mystery as a way to kind of as a metaphor have their relationship. It shifted and changed. And so that was one of the funner elements of things, and then adds another little layer of fun splash of excitement to the book.
Absolutely. I absolutely love it. And I know that the
Mhm.
my book club, we read a lot of nonfiction, and I
Mhm.
like to, first of all, I like to include a big diversity of genre.
Mhm.
So make sure that, like, for those people who like
Mhm.
fiction, we get a fiction book in
Mhm.
there once every quarter or so.
Yes.
Diversity of history, periods of
Mhm.
history, and diversity of aviation, types of flying.
Yes.
And then even more importantly, diversity
Mhm.
of character. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love, is like, because we don't have a lot of books that feature Black women in
Mhm.
aviation, the
Right.
women who have pursued their careers. I mean, a lot,
Mhm.
unfortunately, Black women in aviation are a very small, tiny, tiny fraction
Mhm.
of the population, and many of them are still working.
Yes.
And so we just don't have a lot. And so it's
Mhm.
so wonderful to have some representation in aviation. So thank you so much for this book.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to hear all that. It's one of those things I just kind of started writing, but I'm glad to see that it makes a splash, just as I hope it's making.
Absolutely.